It doesn't begin loudly. No dramatic confession. No sudden pursuit. It begins in silence, with observation. One day, you notice it without fully realizing why. He doesn't reach out, doesn't explain himself, doesn't step closer. Yet somehow he is there, watching, following your rhythm, absorbing your presence from a distance. And this is where most women misunderstand what's happening. Because when a man starts watching you silently, it is rarely indifference. It is the exact opposite. As Carl Jung observed, what we resist not only persists, but grows in size. And what he cannot approach directly, he begins to circle psychologically. Silent watching is not passivity. It is containment. At first, it looks like curiosity, a story viewed but not answered, a presence felt but never named. But curiosity does not linger this way unless it has crossed into something deeper. What's happening is internal fixation. You've activated something in him that he cannot immediately place, control, or dismiss. And when a man doesn't know how to integrate a feeling consciously, he moves it into the unconscious, where it expresses itself as watching. Jung would call this projection. He is no longer simply seeing you. He is seeing what you awaken inside him. Your calm unsettles him. Your boundaries intrigue him. Your emotional self-containment creates tension where he expected accessibility. And tension, when unresolved, becomes fixation. This is why he watches without engaging. Because engagement would require exposure. And exposure would force him to confront something he has spent years avoiding. So instead, he observes. He studies your patterns, your emotional consistency, your absence of chasing, your lack of explanation. And slowly, without permission, you begin to occupy mental space. Not because you demanded attention, but because you no longer needed it. There is a profound psychological shift that occurs when a woman stops trying to be understood. She becomes felt. And when that happens, a man's curiosity turns inward. He begins asking silent questions he never voices. Why does she not seek reassurance? Why does her distance feel heavy? Why do I notice her even when she's quiet? Jung believed the unconscious communicates first through fascination, before desire, before attachment, before fear. And this is only the beginning. Because once curiosity becomes emotional fixation, silence is no longer empty. It is charged, and he feels it, even if he never says a word. At some point, his watching stops being accidental. It becomes deliberate. He tells himself it means nothing, that he's simply curious, simply passing time, simply aware. But awareness that repeats is never neutral. In Jung's view, the psyche does not fixate without purpose. When attention returns again and again to the same image, the same presence, it is because something unresolved has attached itself to the symbol. And right now, you have become that symbol. Not because you pursued him, not because you demanded clarity, but because you withdrew without bitterness. Your silence did not chase him. It confronted him. For a man who has learned to regulate emotions through distance, your emotional self-sufficiency is destabilizing. It removes his familiar leverage. He is used to women who explain themselves, who seek reassurance, who fill silence with effort. But you didn't. And that absence of performance creates psychological tension. So he begins to watch. Because watching allows connection without vulnerability. It allows closeness without risk. It allows desire without accountability. This is why silence becomes his safest form of attachment. Jung would describe this as a liminal state, a space between action and avoidance, where the unconscious negotiates what the conscious mind refuses to face. He feels drawn, but not brave, interested, but not available, affected, but unwilling to admit impact. So instead of reaching out, he studies your moods, your steadiness, your lack of reaction. And every time you don't collapse the distance for him, the fixation deepens. Because what is freely given can be dismissed, but what remains self-contained becomes magnetic. There is something unsettling for a man when a woman's life continues without emotional leakage, when her energy is not spilled into explanations. when her attention is not waiting to be earned back. Your silence forces him into self-observation. He begins to feel the weight of his own hesitation, the discomfort of unfinished emotional business, the unease of wanting without acting. And this is where curiosity crosses a line. It stops being about you and becomes about what you awaken inside him. He watches because somewhere beneath awareness, he senses that approaching you would require change, and watching costs him nothing except peace. This is the moment when silence stops being empty and becomes charged, and he knows it, even if he never names it. At first, he believes he is in control. He tells himself that watching you is harmless, that it's curiosity, not attachment. That distance keeps him safe. But the psyche does not obey intention, as Carl Jung warned. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And this is exactly where he begins to lose his footing. Because repetition is never accidental. He checks again, and again, and again, not because something has changed, but because he has. Your silence begins to regulate his emotional state. Your presence, even distant, becomes a reference point. This is the shift most women never see. You are no longer a person he notices. You become a psychological anchor. When his day feels chaotic, he looks for your stillness. When his emotions feel unclear, he seeks your consistency. When his identity feels unstable, he orients toward your calm. Without asking, without permission, without admitting it. Jung would call this emotional transference, when unmet inner needs attach themselves to an external figure. And the reason this attachment forms in silence is because silence allows fantasy to grow unchecked. He fills the gaps himself. He imagines what you think, how you perceive him, whether you've moved on, whether your distance is choice or indifference. And the not knowing begins to haunt him, because clarity would end the tension. But tension is now feeding something deeper. This is where watching stops being curiosity and becomes emotional dependency. He is no longer observing you. He is regulating himself through you. And here is the paradox. The less you react, the more power your absence gains. You are not pulling him in. You are not sending signals. You are not performing mystery. You are simply contained. And containment creates pressure. A man can tolerate rejection. He can rationalize disinterest. But he struggles deeply with a woman who does not emotionally orient around him. Your silence becomes a mirror. It reflects his hesitation, his unfinished impulses, his fear of exposure. And slowly, something unsettling happens. He realizes that he is more affected by your absence than he ever was by your presence. That realization is destabilizing, because it means the attachment formed without his consent. And once emotional dependency forms in silence, distance no longer protects him. It imprisons him. This is the moment when watching stops being safe and starts demanding resolution. But whether he chooses courage or retreats deeper into silence depends on what happens next. There is a moment, subtle, almost imperceptible, when he realizes the balance has shifted, not because you confronted him, not because you demanded clarity, but because you remained whole without him. And this is where his silent watching takes on a different quality. It is no longer curiosity. It is monitoring. He starts paying attention to details that didn't matter before. How often you appear, how relaxed you seem, how untouched you are by his absence. Your emotional independence becomes unsettling. As Jung understood, when a person encounters someone who embodies what they lack, the psyche reacts with fascination mixed with discomfort. You are no longer simply a woman in his field of vision. You are a reminder of something unresolved inside him. Your stillness exposes his inner noise. Your calm highlights his indecision. Your lack of pursuit confronts his fear of engagement. And fear does something predictable. It tries to regain control. But here's the problem. There is nothing for him to control anymore. You are not chasing closure. You are not explaining yourself. You are not emotionally available on demand. So the only thing left is observation. He watches to feel oriented. He watches to reassure himself that you are still within reach. He watches to quiet the anxiety that rises when he imagines you no longer noticing him at all. This is when silence becomes power. Not loud power, not performative power, but structural power. You are no longer reacting to his presence. He is reacting to yours. And this reversal is deeply destabilizing for a man who equates emotional safety with control. Your absence forces him into self-confrontation. Your lack of demand removes his excuses. Your steadiness eliminates the emotional noise he once hid behind. And slowly, something shifts inside him. He begins to feel watched by his own thoughts. Why does her distance feel heavier than closeness ever did? Why does her silence feel intentional, even if it isn't? Why does the idea of losing access to her unsettle him more than he expected? Jung believed that when an unconscious attachment is threatened, anxiety emerges before awareness. That anxiety is now awake, and the longer you remain still, the more he is forced to face a truth he has avoided. You were never waiting for him, and that realization does not push him away. It pulls him inward, toward a reckoning he cannot escape forever. At this stage, something inside him begins to fracture. What once felt manageable, watching quietly, staying distant, remaining unexposed, no longer soothes him the way it used to. Because silence only protects when it is temporary. When it stretches too long, it turns inward. And now, his watching no longer calms him. It agitates him. As Carl Jung wrote, an emotion does not disappear until it has been listened to. And he has been avoiding listening for a long time. Your continued stillness removes his last illusion. The belief that time alone will dissolve this tension. It doesn't. Instead, anxiety begins to surface in subtle ways. Restlessness, irritation without cause, a sense of being slightly off-center. He finds himself thinking of you when he didn't intend to, replaying moments, searching for meaning where none was spoken. And this is crucial. He is no longer watching to observe you. He is watching to regulate himself. Your presence, even indirect, has become a stabilizer, and the thought of losing access to it creates pressure, not fear of rejection, fear of irrelevance. Because deep down, he senses something unsettling. You would continue without disruption. Your life is not paused. Your energy is not tethered. Your sense of self does not depend on his recognition. And this is the point where emotional fixation becomes unavoidable. Jung would describe this as the ego confronting its limitation, the realization that control has ended. He begins to wonder, quietly, involuntarily, what if she never reaches out? What if this distance is not a tactic? What if I misjudged her availability entirely? These questions destabilize him because they remove the fantasy of return. He can no longer assume access. He can no longer rely on your openness. He can no longer soothe himself with the idea that you're simply waiting. And here, silence does something profound. It forces truth upward. Not spoken truth, internal truth. He starts to feel the emotional cost of inaction, the weight of unfinished connection, the discomfort of desire that was never expressed. This is when watching becomes painful, because every time he sees you grounded, calm, intact, he is reminded of what he did not choose, and what was not chosen begins to haunt. Whether he acts or not is no longer about courage. It is about whether he can tolerate living with the unanswered question you now represent. And the longer you remain unchanged, the louder that question becomes. There comes a point where observation can no longer substitute action. He reaches it quietly. Nothing dramatic happens on the outside, but internally, the tension reaches a threshold. Because silence, when sustained, stops being neutral. It becomes a demand. Not a demand from you, a demand from his own psyche. As Carl Jung understood, when an inner conflict remains unresolved, the unconscious begins to press for integration. And integration requires a decision. This is when his watching changes again. He no longer watches out of curiosity. He watches to see movement. Has she shifted? Has she closed the door? Has she emotionally left without announcement? And the absence of clear answers unsettles him more than rejection ever could. Because rejection ends possibility, but your silence leaves it undefined. Undefined space is where anxiety grows. He begins to feel the cost of staying hidden, the emotional tax of distance, the quiet exhaustion of wanting without choosing. This is the moment where he feels split. One part of him wants to remain safe, to keep watching, keep distance, keep control. Another part wants resolution, contact, clarity, risk. Jung would call this the tension of opposites. And he believed that growth only happens when that tension is endured, not avoided. But endurance is uncomfortable. So he hesitates. He drafts messages he doesn't send. He imagines conversations that never happen. He feels the impulse to reach out, then suppresses it. And every time he does, the pressure increases. Your stillness leaves him with no external excuse. You are not pulling. You are not pushing. You are not signaling urgency, which means the decision is entirely his. And that is terrifying, because now, if he stays silent, he must face the truth that he chose distance. And if he reaches out, he must face the truth that you were never guaranteed. This is why many men linger here longer than they should. Not because they don't feel enough, but because they feel too much without the structure to hold it. Your silence has stripped away ambiguity. It has turned watching into a mirror. And mirrors do not lie. Sooner or later, he must decide to step forward and risk change, or retreat permanently and live with the echo of what he did not claim. And whatever he chooses, your stillness has already done its work. Something strange begins to happen now. Even when you are not visible, even when days pass without contact, even when nothing objectively changes, he still feels you, not as longing in the romantic sense, but as presence. Your absence starts to take up space in his inner world. This is one of the most disorienting experiences for a man who relies on distance to feel safe. Because distance used to mean relief, control, emotional quiet. But with you, distance has begun to do the opposite. As Carl Jung noted, the psyche creates symbols when reality cannot contain the experience. And now, you exist for him as a symbol, not of loss, but of unresolved meaning. He notices your absence the way one notices silence after a loud sound. Not immediately, but insistently. You become a background presence in his thoughts. Not intrusive, not dramatic. Persistent. He finds himself wondering how you are without needing an answer. He imagines your emotional state without evidence. He senses your steadiness without confirmation. And this is where fixation deepens. Because what he cannot access externally, he begins to carry internally. Your silence gives his imagination room to work. And imagination, when fueled by emotional tension, is far more powerful than reality. You are no longer limited by context, time, or interaction. You are everywhere and nowhere at once. Jung would say that this is when projection becomes internalized. He no longer projects onto you. He identifies with the experience of you. Your calm becomes something he seeks unconsciously. Your self-possession becomes something he lacks. Your emotional restraint becomes a standard he feels measured against. And here is the quiet truth. He does not miss conversation. He misses orientation. You represented a version of connection that did not demand collapse. A closeness that did not threaten him, until he realized he wanted it. Now, even your silence feels relational. It speaks without words. It answers nothing, yet says everything. And the more time passes, the harder it becomes for him to return to emotional neutrality. Because neutrality requires indifference, and indifference is no longer available to him. He may not reach out. He may not admit anything. He may even convince himself that this will fade. But something irreversible has already occurred. You have entered his inner landscape. And once that happens, absence is no longer empty. It becomes felt. And what is felt eventually demands a response. Now the conflict sharpens. What once felt subtle becomes intrusive. He catches himself thinking of you at moments that make no sense. Not during loneliness, but during stability. And that is what unsettles him most. Because it means this is no longer situational. It is internal. As Carl Jung said, The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. And the transformation has already happened. Even without contact, he begins to feel divided. One part of him insists on distance, logic, self-control. Another part reacts emotionally, involuntarily, to your existence. He may try to rationalize it. It's just habit. It's curiosity. It will fade. But the psyche resists lies. Because fixation is not about wanting someone. It's about what they awaken that cannot be put back to sleep. Your stillness has activated something he cannot resolve alone. He starts to feel irritation toward himself, moments of self-criticism, a quiet frustration he can't place. Why hasn't he moved on? Why hasn't he reached out? Why does neither option feel clean? This is the internal stalemate. Jung would describe this as the ego confronting the shadow, the part of himself that desires depth, intimacy, presence, but learned early that wanting leads to loss. You didn't create this conflict. You revealed it. And that is why your silence feels heavy, because it does not distract him from himself. It delivers him straight into his own unresolved interior. He realizes now that watching you is no longer soothing. It is exposing. Every glance reminds him of the version of himself that hesitated when something meaningful appeared. Every moment of distance reminds him that safety and fulfillment are not the same thing. This is when fixation becomes uncomfortable, because comfort requires stasis. And you represent movement, not external movement, inner movement. And that movement demands a reckoning. He may pull back further. He may distract himself. He may try to overwrite the feeling with noise. But none of it works for long. Because once the psyche has recognized significance, it does not return to neutrality. Soon, the tension will demand expression, not because you asked for it, but because his inner world can no longer hold what has been awakened in silence. Now the pressure reaches its final form. Not urgency, not romance, but inevitability. Because inner tension cannot remain unresolved forever. At this stage, his psyche is no longer asking what he feels. It is asking who he is willing to be. As Carl Jung taught, avoidance is not the absence of desire, but the refusal to integrate it into identity. And integration always demands cost. This is why his silence now becomes unstable. He may feel an impulse to reach out that surprises him. Not polished, not strategic, almost clumsy. Because when silence has gone on too long, contact is no longer about seduction. It's about relief. Relief from the weight of holding something unspoken. But here is the crucial truth most women never hear. At this stage, silence has already done its sorting. If he reaches out now, it is not because he suddenly became confident, but because he could no longer tolerate the internal dissonance you activated. If he disappears instead, it is not because he felt nothing, but because he chose safety over expansion. Jung would say this is where individuation either begins or is postponed indefinitely. You became a psychological threshold. Crossing you requires growth. Avoiding you requires suppression. And suppression always has consequences. If he breaks the silence, it will feel different than before, less performative, more exposed, because he knows now that access is not guaranteed. If he vanishes, it will not feel clean, because he will carry the unresolved image of you as something unfinished. Either way, the dynamic has already changed. Your stillness forced clarity without confrontation. Your silence demanded a choice without pressure. Your presence rewired the internal rules he lived by. And this is the part that matters most. You did not wait. You did not manipulate. You did not withhold to provoke. You simply remained self-contained. And that is why the outcome, whatever it is, belongs to him, not to chance, not to timing, but to the depth he was willing, or unwilling, to face. Only one part remains, and it is not about him anymore. Here is the quiet truth that changes everything. This was never about whether he watched, or why he stayed silent, or whether he chose to step forward or disappear. It was about who you became when you stopped orienting yourself around his behavior. At the deepest level, what unsettled him was not your beauty, not your mystery, not even the possibility of losing you. It was your psychological autonomy. As Carl Jung understood, individuation begins the moment a woman withdraws her energy from unconscious attachment and returns it to herself. And when that happens, she stops being an object of pursuit and becomes a force of transformation. You did not seduce him. You did not withhold to manipulate. You did not perform detachment. You simply reclaimed your center. And that is why his curiosity turned into fixation. Because he was no longer the reference point. You were. Your silence was not absence. It was containment. Your stillness was not distance. It was self-respect embodied. And when a woman embodies self-respect without explanation, she becomes an initiatory experience. Not every man passes initiation. Some observe and retreat. Some circle and disappear. Some feel and collapse inward. But a few, only a few, rise. And here is the final integration. Whether he reached out or not was never the measure of your impact. The impact already happened. You shifted the dynamic by refusing to abandon yourself.